The problem with top 5 lists is obvious. 5 is never enough. And when it comes to histories gathered across the Forgotten Realms, lore applied to fallen empires that choked on their own dogma or arrogance, and then, as if that was not bad enough, are sprinkled with my own lore OCD that urges me to cast no history aside. Well, restraint then becomes my own personal 4-letter word. For those of you that interact with me and the well over 200 polls that I've put on the channel, you know that I am actively researching and working on a comprehensive lore volume covering the top 5 obscure fallen kingdoms that probably deserved their fate. But these type of discoveries mandate the expected, tidy and clean, nice round numbers, 5, 10, 20, even 100 if you have the stamina for a 10-hour video. But have you ever seen a top 7 or a top 22 video? Forgotten Realms lore, particularly Faerunian history, doesn't do neat endings and has no obligation to meet my arbitrary standard. And honestly, I thank the gods for that. The lore is rich and deep. So you start off trying to crown 5 clear-cut prime examples of obscure, tragic collapse, and the next thing you know, you've got 9 strong contenders, each with fascinating histories that my chronic lore retention syndrome can't set aside, and several dozen interesting footnotes that won't stop screaming at me from the margins to be let back in. A fallen empire with a civic code written in dinosaur blood, governed by immortal paladins walking shoulder to shoulder with a maze-obsessed god with abandonment issues? Yeah, that's gotta stay. So maybe Mezro doesn't make the formal top 5 showcase, but it's getting a spotlight lore video, and this is it. Consider this an honorable mention of historical self-sabotage. And if these mini-volumes designed to shine some light on civilizations too interesting to ignore prove popular, then I'll do more, probably a lot more. We begin with an empire that didn't colonize, crusade, or conquer. It just sat in the heart of Chult, a glowing paradise of divine approval amid the Forgotten Realms version of the Land of the Lost. However, this was a jungle utopia that misunderstood being chosen for being safe. Welcome to Mezro, the city that forgot even paradise has an expiration date. There are many cities, kingdoms, and nations across the Forgotten Realms established to honor, worship, and venerate the gods. They are built by mortal hands, some through their own volition and beliefs, others even inspired or influenced by the various deities indirectly. However, few are the empires that were founded directly and actively by the hands of a deity. Deep within the emerald embrace of primeval forest lies Mezro, a city sculpted in gold and stone wrapped in jungle vines with jaw-dropping vistas of fire-breathing volcanoes and the roaming of prehistoric titans we today call dinosaurs. Established in negative 2637 Dale Reckoning, Mezro was meant to be the Axis Mundi of the jungle wilds of Chult. But perhaps what made Mezro so unique among the realm's many civilizations was the ever-presence of their god. In this jungle haven, the writings from the time are very clear and, most importantly, literal. Ubtao's presence was not metaphor. Incredibly rare among the realm's pantheon, the deity manifested physically, often found in the temple bearing his name, where he is said to have routinely received offerings. And the texts point out his well-known inclination to walk the city's ziggurats beside and among his mortal worshippers, or at least his avatar did. Tabaxi scholars of the time would likely not have been able to tell the difference. It should be noted here that even calling Ubtao a deity introduces disagreement, as the founder of Mezro brings a conflicted and checkered history with him across the lore, thanks to the text of the 4th edition and carrying into the 5e texts. Ubtao is a power deserving of his own volume of discovery, but for the purposes of our discussion and his role in the rise and fall of Mezro, Ubtao was, certainly at the time, a greater Faerunian deity. Regardless, Mezro was a sanctuary, a bastion of good against a jungle otherwise gnawed at by Yuan-Ti, goblinoids, and worse beyond its glyph-etched and warded walls. The land itself a prison for an ancient evil slumbering beneath Chultan lava and soil. Life within the city's four quarters, neatly divided by avenues spoked outward from the central temple of Ubtao, followed the deity's sacred rhythms. The southeast agricultural quarter consisted of various fertile farms yielding a divine bounty. The residential quarter, located in the southwest, a maze of simple yet comfortable adobe homes, housed a populace well educated in both literacy and history. The northwest of the city was the market quarter, bustled with inns, services, and robust tradecraft that centered around an amphitheater said to have been built by Ubtao's own divine hands. Rounding out the city's simple but efficient layout was the Scholars' Quarter, located in the northeast quadrant, an advanced knowledge center that held vast libraries and disciplined colleges, fostering skills from the arcane to the clashing of steel. The city was, to the Tabaxi people, a divine miracle. Dinosaurs pulled carts like obedient oxen as crops flourished with divine magic. Educated children played safely in clean streets where crime was nearly non-existent, offenders identified by hard-to-miss brands of glowing blue upon their foreheads. It is here that I want to pause for a moment in order to clear up what may be really confusing to those of you mostly or only familiar with the 5e lore, and that centers on the very much human inhabitants of Mezro, the worshippers of Ubtao that I keep referring to as the Tabaxi. You are likely most familiar with the playable feline race of Tabaxi introduced in the 5th edition. These Tabaxi catmen, as they were originally called when introduced in the 1981 Fiend Folio, were a humanoid, non-playable creature race, with later 2nd edition origin lore telling us they were a race of jaguar folk, native to Mazteca, and now they carried a more Aztec-inspired theme. However, the name Tabaxi also serves double duty in the Faerunic lexicon, also used to designate the very human and not at all feline tribe of Chultan worshippers, who first followed Ubtao's divine guidance as they migrated from Katashaka, one of the most ancient of Toril's continents. This naming confusion is explained in the lore as a simple misunderstanding, detailed in the 1993 2nd edition adventure called The Jungles of Chult. On the pages of that adventure, we are told that an early explorer of Chult, hailing from Cormyr, once met a human tribesman decked out in full ceremonial dress, consisting of panther skins and other feline adornments. The explorer was told by his guide that the man was a Tabaxi, and through either a misunderstanding of what the guide actually meant, or perhaps due to a flawed translation, this explorer conflated the human tribes of Chult and those jaguar folk, who are now a playable race in the 5th edition, as one and the same. The lore would close the loop on this confusion many years later by confirming that the human tribesmen from our story must have liked that designation, as they would go on to use the Tabaxi name for their tribes of people. It is undeniably a confusing aspect of the lore, but hopefully I've cleared it up just a little bit. In any event, Mezro had become a thriving Chultan center of Tabaxi society, and they lived in peace and harmony with its god and the formidable, often deadly jungle surrounding it. They were pious, yet joyful, self-sufficient, and fiercely protected, not just by divine Tabaxi warriors, but by the aura of Ubtao himself. Yet I must acknowledge that to call Mezro a true empire is, at first blush anyway, a biased indulgence, colored by my own love for Chult, a wild land that deserves more attention. That said, Mezro was never meant to be an empire in the traditional sense anyway. The Lost City, as it came to be known, lacked the sprawling conquests of Unther, the maritime ambition of Shamdath, or the sheer arrogance of Netheril. Mezro's sovereignty was more subtle, steeped in the spiritual, not the spatial. Its influence spread not from swords or tribute, but from the beat of sacred drums. The consecrated heart of a people consisting mostly of humans from the largest tribe in Chult, Mezro became the center of a peaceful empire, a confederation of tribes, each united in faith. It didn't boast borders drawn in blood, nor levy armies to pillage distant lands. It didn't expand so much as radiate outward, the earthly nexus of their covenant with their god Ubtao, the father of dinosaurs. It called itself the Jewel of Chult, and for a time that was indeed the case. But jewels are fragile. and fragility, when mistaken for incorruptibility, is, more often than not, an early death rattle. Under the divine protection of Ubtao, Mezro was governed by the Barae, a select group of 7 paladins and priests, divine champions handpicked by the god and each granted a measure of his power. Divine proxies in every way, the Barae did not age. They healed wounds with thought and banished evil with a gesture. The Barae ruled jointly, each entrusted with an aspect of the city's governance, a structure designed to ensure a wise and altruistic rule. Mezro was perfection, its magic infallible, its people pious. What could possibly end such a utopian and divine theocracy that in theory should have been immune to the taint of ambition and arrogance? It would not be flame, plague, or planar invasion that would crumble Mezro, but a trifecta of far more silent poisons: complacency, betrayal, and abandonment. Mezro's fall is attributed to a slow erosion of its divine mandate, coupled with a betrayal from within. Because when you're literally chosen by a god, you tend to stop looking in the mirror for your own flaws. Ras Nsi, one of the exalted Barae sworn to protect the city, surrendered to the oldest of temptations, seeking personal power and status against Ubtao's decrees, chafing against the humility demanded by the deity. The Tabaxi champion first grew ambitious, then resentful, then heretical. He murmured of conquest. He believed only he could unify Chult, not as steward, but as emperor. He stirred rebellion and taught forbidden lore, secretly embracing the very necromancy Ubtao abhorred. The schism culminated in Ras Nsi's attempted coup using an undead army that ultimately failed. Ubtao would strip him of his immortality, but the remaining 6 Barae decided to exile rather than eliminate Ras Nsi for his betrayal. A merciful gesture rooted in their own virtue, yet a grace they would come to regret, all hinting at a glaring fracture in Ubtao's grand design. Most significantly, after this failed coup, a fabled Mezroan proverb would soon be fulfilled as Ubtao himself began to withdraw from the city. Disappointed with his worshippers who became fractured, many falling to the same corruption as the exiled Ras Nsi, the deity became distant, his presence seen less often. Ubtao had determined the Tabaxi were no longer united in divine purpose, and like so many aloof gods, he simply lost interest. He had given them a city and warned not to worship comfort. He told them life was a maze, yet in the end, it seemed to reach salvation, they would have to draw their own map. With Ubtao seeming to desert the city he created, the Tabaxi people only became more fractured. No longer bathed in the deity's celestial light, Mezro lost its divine protections, a fact not lost on the many dangers outside Mezro's walls. Among the evils to first take notice of this divine abandonment was of course the banished Ras Nsi. In his exile, the former Tabaxi would fully embrace the vile power of the unholy, not only joining with the Yuan Ti cults, but he would also master the dark arts and eventually forsake his own human form in favor of the Serpentine. Deep in the jungle wilds of Chult, he would carve out his own necropolis and raise all new dead armies. When the Spellplague shattered Mistra's weave and the world's magic collapsed in 1385, Dale Reckoning, any remaining divine wards upon Mezro's walls also faltered. Ras Nsi, armed with his undead legions and a bit of a god complex, would seize upon this opportunity to march upon Mezro's weakened gates. The ancient legends and histories of exactly what happened next are a bit mixed. Some scholars insist that Mezro's collapse was sudden and swift, with both ancient and contemporary Chultan writings finding a consensus that the city was destroyed completely, sinking beneath the swamps with only scant archaeological ruins left to mark the destructive event. However, other chronicles insist that a contingency plan was in place and enacted in order to shift the entire city into a new demi-plane. even going so far as to leave behind counterfeit ruins, elaborate props meant to conceal the ruse and cover the city's escape. Regardless, to the world, its history books and realms maps, Mezro was no more. And if the apocryphal legends are to be believed, Mezro didn't fall to enemy steel, unholy magic, or even the devastation of the Spellplague. It just left. Was this a desperate retreat in the face of certain defeat, or a preemptive withdrawal? Probably the latter, but only if you believe in myths. Nonetheless, the divine jungle sanctuary had fallen, but under circumstances that beg the question, why does Mezro belong on any list of fallen empires that deserved their fate? The sins of its champions, the betrayal of one and the naivete of six? Or how about the sins of its people, their faith fractured to believe in false gods, leading to the loss of divine favor? Or perhaps the capricious sins of Ubtao himself are most to blame, an all too familiar theme for entire pantheons. Take your pick, or choose all three. Either way, the lost city received the fate it deserved. Mezro let fate become insulation, refusing to adapt to the world around it. They made a god its backbone, and then forgot how to stand without one. The jungle wilds don't care about your hymns, and undead armies don't fear your vast libraries. A city that forgets how to fight because it believes it's above the violence isn't holy, it's helpless. And the jungles of Chult will only consume the forlorn. So there you have it, Mezro, a stark reminder that even the brightest jewels of civilization can tarnish when faith falters and gods turn away. But Mezro is just one of many obscure fallen kingdoms, and a full-length top 5 is on its way. But now, I want to hear from you. What ruins of shattered empires would you like to dig in next? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. And thank you so much for joining me. No one wants to go on an expedition alone, so like, subscribe, and hit the bell so we can do this again real soon. Until our next exploration, take care, my friends.